Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Blue Mondays, the GLORIO blog's new watch-along podcast for Psalms of Planet's Eureka 7, a much-loved anime series, which is, I know, I personally am a big fan of, and many people on the blog are familiar with, which is turning 20 years old this year. So we're going to watch it again from beginning to end and talk about it in the vein of our previous projects on Legend of the Galactic Heroes and Neon Genesis Evangelion there. And for this project, I am joined by the lovely Aqua Gaze, who has not seen the show before. And
don't think that's anything special. There are many shows I have never seen before.
Sure, but I mean, like, you know, we're gonna do the perspective thing, right? Like, you know, I'm a big fan. You've never seen it before.
Right.
They fight crime. And for this first episode, we are also joined by a special guest, and that would be the remarkable G. How are you doing there, G?
I'm doing well, Zigg. Thank you for having me on for color commentary.
Yeah.
Don't worry, as you continue to record these, you will get so good at rattling off the names of these shows. By the end of this podcast, you will nail it every time. You will say the hit 2005 Bones original anime, Psalm of Planets, Eureka 7.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've done hosting on anything, you know, so it's...
But no, this is fun. I actually did not... Aqua, I did not know you had not seen Eureka 7. That's news to me, actually.
I was going to say it's been a while since we've been able to use the words hit and Bones original anime in the same sentence.
I mean, that is also why this is kind of special, right?
I mean, this show kind of cursed every Bones original anime after it, which, you know, we'll get into. But yeah, you know, I'm excited to have you guys aboard, you know, and like I said, this is a big year for Eureka 7 because it is 20 years since its original airing. It began airing in April 2005, I believe. A very different world, a very different anime industry, a very different time for all concerned. So I guess before I start, you know, going into the show there, I just want to know what your relative level of familiarity is with it. Now, Aqua, we've already said that you have not seen the show before, but, you know, have you absorbed a great deal through osmosis? You know, are you familiar with some of the basic bits and bobs that make up the show, or are you largely, you know, completely coming in fresh?
The thing is, like, Eureka 7 is like a show from that era when, you know, you had, like, most people who were into anime and discussing it online were not actually watching seasonal anime, but it was one of those shows that actually broke through that barrier and was the talk of a town for a couple of months, even more than that, because it ran for an entire year. That, of course, has to do with the fact that it did air on American television 1 year after it aired in Japan. But it is also a show, I think I got into anime slightly too late for it to be on my radar, really. I think I started, you know, digging more deeply into anime aside from the standard shonen shows watched in 3 parts on YouTube in 720p or whatever.
The classics.
Yeah. And like I think I got into like delving beyond that like a year or 2 years after Eureka 7 aired, and I did do some backlogging. Like I watched Ouran High School Host Club, for example, which may be the show Bones did exactly before or exactly after this.
It's immediately after this. I believe.
Immediately after
there
this.
Is some crossover stuff, actually.
Right. So otherwise, I just know it as like the prototype of the Bones original anime. You know, that thing that was something new back when it first aired, but that really started becoming a meme as I was getting into anime. You know, you had your shows like your Captain Irvs and your Zamds and all of that, and all of that stuff.
I'm sure Zamd will come up quite a few times as we move through the series, but yes.
Right. But other than that, it was mostly like, it's the one of those that is good. You know, like,
well, that remains to be seen, huh?
Yeah. Otherwise, music references, surfing robots. There's a guy named Holland. That's just about all I knew about this show.
Okay, so
I'm excited.
pretty fresh then. Yeah.
Yeah.
G, obviously, as a big mecha fan, you've seen this. But has it been a while for you? Or are you fairly fresh on it?
It has been a fairly long time. So obviously I rewatched the first couple of episodes for this recording, but before this, the last time I watched Eureka 7 was literally the first time I watched Eureka 7.
Okay. And was that when it originally aired, or
around that time? About I would say 2006. I would say I remember this specifically because, I won't give the whole G's journey to becoming a mecha fan backstory here, but
pilgrimage to Mecca, you might say.
One could say, God, I wish I had time to bring back a feature like that. But I say this because I distinctly recall watching Eureka 7, Code Geass, and Gurren Lagann in fairly quick succession.
I mean, they all exist. I'll talk about this a bit more later, but they were kind of the second wave of post Ava mech anime, really. A lot
that is fair.
In that mid to late 2000s era, and again, I think that we'll be referencing those other two shows quite a bit as examples of stuff that was happening while Eureka 7 was airing. But I'm kind of with you, G. I love this show. I've watched it I watched it when I was in university, which would have been the mid to late 2000s, although it was definitely a couple of years after it aired. I remember...
I would say... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I definitely remember not downloading it from XDCC bots over my university halls network. So
you remember using your satellite to tune into Adult Swim to watch it legally.
I remember flying to Japan to watch it on TV.
I was not advanced enough yet, so I'm a little bit younger, right? And so for me, to be clear, I also have a great deal of love for Eureka 7 in my heart, right? I have a strong fondness for it, and for me,
now.
And I think for me, an element of it, to speak to being less advanced, right? I watched it in 3 parts on shady streaming sites, right? Despite the fact that it aired on Toonami or Adult Swim or something of the.
I think it was Adult Swim.
Adult Swim. I think I was already maybe halfway through Eureka 7 by the time it hit Adult Swim.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it's again, not to get into the whole backstory thing, but Eureka 7 kind of was. I'm not going to say the inciting incident. There are too many mecha anime to list to give that credit, but I think in a lot of ways, Eureka 7 was very special for me.
A formative show, let's say.
Definitely. I've been kind of working on this thesis ever since we started talking about this project. That I can save the full version of this thesis for maybe as we watch more of the show.
Spread it out across the episodes, But
I think Eureka 7 was right place, right time for me, right? Because I was, let's see, 2005, 2006 ish. I was a teenager, right? Maybe a couple years older than Renton, and this very much to me was how do I put this? In hindsight, the platonic ideal of the boyhood adventure mecha anime.
Yeah, I think there is a strong element of that that the show invites. I think.
For sure.
I'm looking at my notes here, and it says "Hero's Journey?" Right.
No, I think that's a big part of why Eureka 7 appealed to me so much. Is that look, I was in fact the perfect demographic for it at the time, right?
You were the target demographic for
literally,
it.
Yeah, and it worked, right? Yeah. And as I've kind of grown more, aware of what Eureka 7 was inspired by, and obviously as I've engaged with more mecha media, again, I don't know how I still feel about the show because again, it's been so long since I've watched it. Apparently, almost 20 years. I do really appreciate how good of a job this show did at evoking so many of its forefathers ideals and themes but finding its own way of doing that, I think.
And I mean, in relation to that, I think let's talk, before we launch into discussing the episodes, let's talk a little bit about where this show comes from and where the people who made this show came from. So this is arguably the signature show of Studio Bones, or at least it was for a long time.
I mean, Full Metal Alchemist, but the like original show.
That was going to be my next mention.
Yeah,
but yes, yeah, you know. So I mean, just a little bit of history of Bones. Bones was created in 1999. It's largely a spin-off of staff from Sunrise, especially their Studio 2. All three of the founders, Masahiko Minami, Toshihiro Kawamoto, and Hiroshi Osaka, all came from Sunrise Studio 2, and they poached a large number of the staff from there as well. So just to give you some idea of their background, Minami, who's the president to this day, was the associate producer on Gundam 0083, produced G Gundam, produced Escaflowne, produced Cowboy Bebop, which is one of the major works that you'll see seeded Bones and Eureka 7 directly there. Kawamoto was a well-known key animator. He was also the character designer for Gundam 0080, Gundam F91, Gundam 0083, 08th MS team. So, you know, a lot of mecha background there. And Osaka was a character designer for Victory Gundam and G Gundam. Was the animation director on Brave of Gold Goldran. And he was the chief animation director on Escaflowne and the animation director on Cowboy Bebop. So again, there's a lot of common ground between these founders and also the staff members they brought with them there. So mecha very deeply ingrained in the soul of this studio there. Sadly, Hiroshi Osaka passed away in 2007, fuck cancer. But like I said, Masahiko Minami is still at Bones. He's the president, and Kawamoto is as well. He's one of the high-level execs there. So in 2005, Bones was 6 years old, and as Aqua alluded to, they'd already produced some pretty high-profile shows up to this point. Full Metal Alchemist was undoubtedly the big one. The 2003 anime, the original one with the anime original ending there. But they sort of ping-ponged all over the place in terms of the stuff they'd produced. And notably, they had produced 8 shows up to this point, and most of them had been originals. The biggest Bones original before Eureka 7 is probably Razefon. I suspect you'll have a few words to say about Razefon, G.
The infamous Razefon.
Yes.
A show that is only ever mentioned when we talk about the impact of Neon Genesis Evangelion.
I have sometimes thought about not giving Razefon another chance necessarily, but
I think there are interesting things about Razefon, but its reputation as kind of a straight Evangelion ripoff is not unwarranted, let's say. But, you know, Bones had dabbled about in a lot of stuff. You know, they produced like a goofy fantasy historical as their first work, Hebrew War Chronicles. They'd adapted a Clamp manga, Angelic Layer. They'd done Full Metal Alchemist, Wolf's Rain, Scrapped Princess. So there was a lot of clearly an emphasis towards original work at the studio. You know, they'd done a lot of stuff there. Eureka 7 was originally proposed to them by Bandai, but once they agreed to take the project on, they basically tore down the entire proposal and built it from the ground up there. So this is very much from the studio of the studio, born entirely from internal stuff there. So the thing is, although Bones were a new studio, they were certainly not a scrappy upstart. It's worth pointing out. You know, they had serious star power. They were always a 2-studio studio. Eureka 7 was produced by Studio B, but they always had a pretty large staff base to draw on. So I'm going to go through some of the key creatives who were responsible for shepherding the series to the screen, and, you know, I'm sure there will be a few familiar names here. So let's start with the director. The series overall director is Tomoki Kyoda. He was born in Osaka, trained as a graphic designer, not in animation, but eventually moved into animation. He was the assistant director on Razafon, and he directed the compilation movie Pluralitis Concentio. Eureka 7 was the first time he directed an anime TV series, and for better or for worse, he is the sort of defining creative throughout the history of the franchise. He is. Yeah.
We can't get into it now.
We cannot get into that. We can't get into that. But he is the one staff member who has consistently returned for the sequels, the movies, the spin-offs, all of that stuff.
Yes. He is the driving force behind the. He is the reason why we can call it the Eureka 7 franchise.
Yeah. Basically, although I'm sure Corporate Bones were more than happy to crank out some sequels as well there. But other notable work he's been on, he worked with Studio Kara for quite a few years. Most notably, he's credited for storyboards on Evangelion 1.0. But my understanding is the one that's almost a carbon copy of the series, let's put it that way. But my understanding is that he did quite a lot of heavy lifting in behind-the-scenes creative work for that. Also, interestingly, major storyboarder on Mobile Suit Gundam The Witch from Mercury, which was one which surprised me a little bit there.
I did not know that, yeah.
That show does have extreme Bones energy.
It does kind of, yes. It's certainly... But again, as we've established, like the history of Bones and Sunrise is kind of deeply intertwined at a certain level there, Series composition, so head writer, lead creative, basically. It's your friend and mine, Dai Sato, another name who has become infamous in the years since, perhaps. But
yes,
at this time, he was very much the hot young thing on the agenda, so to speak. He had been mentored by Shinichiro Watanabe, got started writing scripts for Cowboy Bebop, wrote a lot of Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, did some work with Bones on Wolf's Rain, wrote some of Samurai Champloo, so a pretty impressive resume up to this point. He
remains part of Watanabe's posse
yes,
to
absolutely.
this day, right? He wrote for Space Dandy, he wrote for Carol and Tuesday.
Yeah, correct, yeah. There's still a very close association between there.
Yes.
This was his first time writing, being the lead creative on a show, being like the head writer, so to speak. He's been very prolific in the years since. A couple of shows he's worked on: Ergo Proxy, Joe Rosetta, Space Dandy, as you mentioned, Listeners, which was a fairly blatant attempt to recapture the magic of Eureka 7. Deco. He's currently working on Pokemon. So, character design and overall visual style, this is the responsibility of Kenichi Yoshida, who's an interesting character. He joined the industry and worked for Ghibli through most of the 90s, most notably working on Only Yesterday and Porco Rosso, so some pretty big hitters there. Spent a couple of years as a kind of independent freelance key animator, where he notably he did some key animation on the first episode of Evangelion, and also was brought in to punch up some of the animation on the back half of Turn A Gundam, which is where he ran into the man, the legend, Yoshiyuki Tomino. Yes, it's a GLORIO podcast. That means Tomino has to be mentioned. Seriously, though, like he and Tomino got along well, and they made Overman King Gaina together, which was Yoshida's first anime where he took lead artistic duties, character design, and all that. Anybody who's seen Overman King Gaina knows that it has his very distinctive character design, which you can see here, see in Eureka 7 as well. And of course, he would later go on to be the lead character designer and animation director on Gundam Reconquista and G, again with Tomino. Mechanical design, it's Shoji Kawamori. Do you really need me to tell you about Shoji Kawamori? Probably the most famous mechanical designer ever. Father of the transforming mech. Macross, Gundam, 0083, Aquarian, Pat Labor, Diaclone, Transformers, the dude designed Optimus Prime. I think probably his most relevant credit here is that he did mech design on Escaflowne, which, as we've established, a lot of the Bones staff worked on, and that's probably the connection which landed him the gig here.
I must say, there are a lot of people who worked on this show whose names eerily echo if you speak them out loud nowadays.
What do you mean by that, eerily echo?
Well, as in... Well, the kids would call them cursed, right? Your Daisatos, your Shoji Kawamoris.
Yes.
These are all people who have been very productive in the years since Eureka 7 and are nowadays perhaps better known for their misses than their hits.
I mean, the thing about Kawamori is that he has always been an outstanding mecha designer and not a great anything else, really.
Yes. But I think what Aqua's getting at is like, there's kind of an interest, like, in some ways this almost builds the myth of Eureka 7, because
there's a certain lightning in a bottle quality.
Right, because none of these people arguably ever really hit these heights individually ever again.
You know,
I mean, it's the classic legendary band breaks up thing, right? They all start their solo careers and they all do weird self-indulgent stuff, but it never matches the heights of when they were all together.
Yeah, you know, and again, I think, you know, most good art is very much a grasp the moment thing, so to speak. But yes, you know, I mean, like, Kawamori is kind of immune from that, you know, because even when this show was made 20 years ago, he was already a legend among legends.
Yes.
And, you know, just having, like, and to be clear, you know, he was supported by a team. I don't know how much of the actual mechanical design he did, though he at least did Nevash Type 0. But, you know, his involvement was a big name to put on the marquee. You know, when a show has mechs designed by Shoji Kawamori, fans of the genre will sit up and listen. So his involvement was a major boost there. Final key creative I want to point out, music. Music is very important in this show, as you'd expect. Music was by Naoki Sato, who has been a journeyman composer for a very long time. He's composed for a huge amount of stuff. Notably, while Eureka 7 was airing, he was in the middle of a run of composing for the first 5 Pretty Cure shows. Since then, he's done the live-action Rurouni Kenshin movies, the 2 Stand By Me Doraemon movies, and a whole bunch of Japanese live-action and animated movies as well. There, so it's an interesting cast of creatives, you know, with a wide variety of different you know, experiences and specialities there, and I think, you know, it turned out to be a good mix, in my opinion. There, so we've got some up and comers, we've got some legends, we've got some people who are sort of hovering in between there. There's also the voice acting cast, but we'll go into that as we discuss the characters there. So, unless anybody has anything else to say on the creatives, shall we get into the episodes?
Let's go.
I think the one thing I will say is specifically about Kenichi Yoshida, the character designer, is I think, like, again, a lot of this can just be nostalgia, but I will say, like, probably because of his involvement on King Gainer and Eureka 7, like, I cannot help but just associate his art style with, like, early 2000s anime. I think, like, there's, like, a real, like, because, like, obviously, like, it's hard to describe it in audio, but, like, there's like a specific, like, I don't know, there's a quality to his character design that, I mean, we'll probably get into more once we start talking about the show proper, that is just, like, I think just feels part of, like, a very specific, like, early 2000s vibe, right? You know, we are talking about this, like, a lot of the things the show itself will get into, right? It's like,
I think with Yoshida, especially, it's the fact that his style is sort of a little more realistic than a lot of anime styles. You know, people are humanly proportioned for the most part.
I think it's actually, I mean, I think it's that, but I think it's also, there's an element of, like, you know, there is, like, especially for his time, right? There's a diversity to his character design.
Right.
And we can talk about that once we get into the show proper, but, like, and it very much feels like it harkens to, like, it's hard to think about it now, right? But like that sort of specific, like, optimistic vibe of the early 2000s, right? Like
to a
you
certain
see
extent.
to a certain extent, right? You see the rise of, like, like the neoliberal order has not lost its luster yet, right? Like there is still that feeling of, the Fukuyama end of history, like optimism, this feeling of like, oh, like, the big problems in the world is it's like, the environment and it's, free expression. And I feel like you get a lot of that vibe. And maybe that's just because of the works he worked on and the creators he worked with. But
well, that's the thing, right? Because I think you hit the nail right on the head. It's like one of the things I noticed when watching these first 2 episodes is that you have a very diverse set of characters, right? You have characters of different ethnicities than Mukoku Seiki, like the generically white / Japanese that all of that anime characters generally are. And like, now that you've mentioned a lot of the shows that have been mentioned up until now, your Cowboy Bebops, your Ghost in the Shells, those are shows that have the same thing in common. This is also something that is consistently seen in the works of Shinichiro Watanabe, who also has, ties with the key creatives that were involved in this show. So I think it is very much an active choice that is being made here. It reflects an actual ideology and the way they're going about this project.
And, I think, without getting too deep into stuff that we'll explore in future episodes, the very global cosmopolitan feel of the cast is important because it aligns with the message of the show, I think, which is, this very sort of free love association, one society vibe.
It's very Star Trek-y, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent, I think. I mean, I think in that sense, Yoshida's art fits really well because, as you say, it is hugely diverse. You could never accuse this show of only having 6 faces. I
mean, that is often like, I think that is often what distinguishes good character art from generic character art, and it's something that is outside of artistic communities not very often acknowledged. The fact that characters have distinct silhouettes, that their faces on their own, if you don't just look at their faces without looking at their haircuts and their clothes and other things that we generally use to differentiate characters, that these faces are still very distinct. And that is something that you often don't get in anime. Anime is sort of associated with same face to a certain extent. So when an anime comes up that actually has characters with different body types, characters whose age is visible in their design, characters who are tall or short or big or thin, that really stands out. And that is often what makes memorable character design, in my opinion.
And what I will say is that, like, a lot of the limited design of anime is because of the way it is made, and the very it is a very limited form of animation. Part of the reason that Eureka 7 is able to exhibit that kind of cosmopolitan nature and its very varied character design is because it was an expensive show. The production values are very high for the most part, and they were able to take their time. Yoshida's art, I know, is a little divisive sometimes. A lot of people feel that there's not enough stylization there. I think that became more obvious when he became the lead Gundam character designer for Reconquista and G. There was a lot of debate over his work there, more so than here, I think. But again, the fact that this is an original work that he has a blank canvas to design the characters on, I think is beneficial both for him and for the perception of the characters as well.
It's like, that's a weird opinion to have, because like, you can't accuse this show of not looking like anime. You still have your big eyes, your blue hair, your haircuts that defy gravity. So I think it's a nice little compromise between that more like gritty, more perhaps realistic style and the idealized, colorful art that we've come to expect from anime.
And it is very distinctive. You can always tell Kenichi Yoshida characters straight off the bat because there is something about his style that is super distinctive. But we're basically there. Let's launch into episode 1, and talk about what's going on. And the first thing I want to say is that it takes less than 120 seconds to get our first Itano circus.
Oh, here I thought you were about to. I thought you were going to talk about the OP, since that's technically the first thing.
Actually,
that-
we should talk about the OP because it is so strongly iconic of
Yes,
the show.
it is.
Aqua, as somebody, as the newbie to the show, what did you think of the OP Days by Flo?
My first
of all, it's
was,
early 2000s as fuck, right? So-
Yes, absolutely. Well, more like the first thing I heard was like, oh, this is the Japanese trying to do Manchester, like the very like groovy bongos.
Oh, yeah.
With the rock instrumentation. Yeah, well, it's like
yeah.
the thing, but like Manchester is very 90s genre, right? It was pretty much dead by the time this came around, which makes it the perfect genre for an anime OP. So this is a song by Flo. Flo are like I think to me they are the quintessential shonen band. They are Naruto fighting dreamers. They are Code Geass, Jibun. Whoa.
I regret to inform you that the Naruto OP is actually just called Go.
I know it's just called Go, but no one calls it that.
Yes,
right?
I know. I mean, the thing I will say is that this was very early on in that association with Flo. It was before most of their I mean, Code Geass is still a year or so away.
Right.
I can't remember if Naruto had made it to that.
I'm pretty sure Naruto had made it to that point.
But, so, I mean, they are famous, obviously, but they are not yet a cliched choice to do an opening, let's say.
But, yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, I think this song is fine. It doesn't immediately stand out to me, but I can understand why it is iconic. It's just like the being the freak that I am. I like the insert song that they use in episode.
Oh, we could talk about
2.
that.
Yeah,
way more.
I definitely want to talk about the insert song.
You'll hear it. You'll hear it a bunch more as well.
Yeah.
But yes, we will talk about that. I don't know. For me, I have always loved this opening. I think that
I think Zigg, I think you and I are maybe we're like poisoned by nostalgia, but like I am willing to like go to the mat and say that like Days by Flo and the accompanying like sequence is like
it's
I
up
don't
there
know,
for my favorite OP ever.
I mean, it is very inspirational, right? You hear it, you look at it. It's a very classic anime OP.
It
visually,
soars.
aesthetically, right? Yes, it soars. That's a good way of putting it. Like you don't have, people often, joke about the classics, running against the sunsets, reaching out your hand towards the sky, and those those images may not literally be in there, but it gives off the same vibe. It is this sense of adventure, this sense of youthful energy, the springtime of youth put to music and imagery.
It sounds like the show wants you to feel, which is sort of swept away on this epic adventure. Those synthy violins get me every time, and it's such a perfect marriage of music to the material. I love it. I watch it every time. I think it's fantastic.
It's a non-negotiable, not a skippable OP for me.
Also, the mark of a true OP, extremely easy to edit over completely unrelated footage to make a joke out of. Very good for that as well.
Yes, Oh man, I'm not gonna be able to find the clip now, but shout outs to that one shit post somebody made of Homer Simpson.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna say that one. I knew you were gonna say that one.
Yeah, with Days by Flo playing.
I'll try and find it. I'm pretty sure I have the actual video saved.
It's like maybe one of my favorite clips ever made on the internet.
It's so good. It's so good.
Anyways, we can talk about this show.
Yeah. But we start off, we go straight in with the surfing robots. It's the show with surfing robots, and you get your surfing robots. So
very strong statement of intent.
Yes, I will say actually, Aqua, we're going to do a quick music quiz for you. This show has a huge number of music references, particularly to 80s trance, house, acid stuff, because that's the stuff that that director Tomoki Kyoto grew up on. But they're all over the shop. Every episode title is supposedly a song reference. So let's start with the title of episode 1, Blue Monday. Do you know what this is a reference to?
Well, I mean, That's the name of the podcast. No,
Yes.
so Blue Monday is a reference to the New Order song, of
Correct.
course.
Yes. Probably their most famous song.
Yes, the song that put New Order on the map. Kind of seen as even though it wasn't their first single, it's kind of seen as the song of a rebirth.
Yes, it's their signature song, for
right,
sure.
right. So in case you don't know, New Order is the band that rose from the ashes of Joy Division, the band that is mostly known for printing T-shirts that people buy at H&M. So after the tragic death of the frontman Ian Curtis, the other members of Joy Division decided to start a new band, but they wanted to adopt a new sound. Joy Division is a band very much associated with this melancholy romanticism. It's this they're
a classic post-punk band,
right?
Really.
They are also seen as like the forebearers of goth music and the whole goth subculture, right? So for New Order, they decided to add a synthesizer player, a keyboardist to the band, and wanted to make something decidedly more danceable while it was still rooted in that sophistication of post-punk. They went and looked for influences in music that was not necessarily considered very acceptable in the audiences that loved Joy Division. They went and took some inspiration from Italo disco, like very, very European kitschy music, kind of queer coded music, and I think that makes it a very funny first title to go with, because of course it is not only is that song a sort of indication, it's like a song that clearly builds on a legacy while also introducing something bright and fresh and unique, which is kind of what this show is
thematically,
right?
yeah.
Also, I mean, like it's one of the less obtuse references in the show. I mean, like I said, a lot of the show is heavy references to very niche kind of, especially Northern British and Japanese, obviously,
right, and Japanese, right?
Like house dance, electro stuff, So starting with kind of like a very famous allegory is a fairly solid option, I think. But it's not just the episode titles. There's references all over the place. For example, the first three mechs here, the first three LFOs that we see, are all named after Roland synthesizers.
Right. LFO, of course, being a reference to iconic 2000s dance formation LMFAO, known for their hit song, party rock anthem.
Well, in all seriousness, we want to talk about this introduction, right? I think I love the LFOs, man. I fuck like
it's such a dumb idea. It's great. Like,
they're so good. Like, just,
right, but the thing is, like,
it's so novel, but it works. Like,
it's a dumb idea, but it is grounded in the setting, right? It is not just they're surfing robots. There is a sort of vaguely scientifically
the trapar,
valid sounding. There is like the semblance of this could actually be a thing, like waves of air, waves of radiation, waves of sound in the air that these mech can use to like surf and fly around.
For me, it's not even so much a plausibility thing as it's like perfect for the vibes, right?
Like, the visual is unforgettable. Like the trails of green across the sky is such an iconic visual that it's impossible not to associate it with the show.
And I feel like the way, like, so you get this cool intro, right, with the LFOs, the Atano Circus, like, sets the vibe, right, surfing robots. And, I didn't really think about it because obviously I haven't watched it in almost 20 years, but, like, man, the transition from that into, like, the introduction to Renton, it's like, man, what a perfect, like, 8-minute like intro to a show.
It's fantastic because you're given a taste of what he is craving, right? Like like the
editing in this first episode is very good. Some of the cuts, the hard cuts from this rough and tumble freedom of the Gecko State, pirate / terrorists / cool dudes, to like Renton whining about his boring like suburban life.
His very fully coolly coded introduction.
Yeah.
There's definitely some inspiration there, I think. But
Yeah.
also, I think, speaking of the introduction to Renton, what's your first impression of him, Aqua? What, like, kind of, we've been through decades and decades of shonen heroes. What's your first read on our hero here?
The thing is, like, and this is something I'm going to repeat very often, is the show has aged incredibly well. Like,
oh yeah,
if it were not in 4x3, this could have been a show that was made nowadays.
I will point out that this was one of the very last shows to be made pre-HD. The next year, shows were being made in widescreen HD.
Yeah. Because watching this and the number of cliches or tropes of the, I've already mentioned the hero's journey, right? Yeah. The number of beats it hits, that's a relatively high number, but you don't notice it because this show was made before an era when hitting beats for the sake of hitting beats became the core concern for writing in many anime.
It's less mechanistic than a lot of modern writing.
So you have Renton, who is your classic, sort of bored, sort of, ennui-riddled anime teenager who has a big dream and wants to go for it.
Yearns for adventure.
Who lives in the shadow of certain idols that he has, Holland and his own father.
Right.
And still, you immediately you register this kid as a likable, relatable kid. He does not come across as, here is your standard hero for this kind of show. It's in the little details. It's in the fact how he has a complicated relationship with his father, with his sister, with his grandfather. It's more than just, I idolize my father or I completely hate my father, right? It is more than just, I fully support my sister or I fully reject my sister. It is a very humane, complicated way of portraying a character that is otherwise very straightforward. He is Luke Skywalker. He is any other kid on a backwater planet who wants to get out there and explore the galaxy, right?
I think, to me, one of the key things about this intro is that although we clearly empathize and sympathize with Renton, the show is also not afraid to make him seem like a bit of a loser, his weird little these weird little sketches in his exercise books, his weird fanboyism and all that.
My favorite part of the first episode is that Renton spends the entire episode being like, "Oh, I don't care about my grandpa. Like, he's a mechanic. Oh, that's so boring. I'm going to be a cool surfer guy like Holland." And then the moment Eureka shows up in her robot, he starts mansplaining how robots work to her.
Like, incredibly. The bit where he says, "as an ice mechanic," it's so good. Like, and you don't have to point it out because it is just the kind of thing a shitty teenager would do.
Yeah.
Right. He keeps repeating he's 14 years old, right? That and I think for me, like, what works. And I think I'm really looking forward to, like, kind of a second part of my Eureka 7 thesis that I kind of have bubbling in the background, but I will need to watch more episodes of, is, like, how have my perceptions of Renton and Holland evolved over the years, right? Mm-hmm. Because when I watched Eureka 7 for the first time, I was closer in age to Renton.
Yeah.
Watching it now, I am much closer in age, or probably older than Holland. And again, not to spoil anything, we're only talking about the first 2 episodes, but like the relationship those two have as, like, a child and adult, I think is, like, probably one of the more interesting elements of Eureka 7. But for now, like, I think what, like, I was surprised by is, like, Renton is, like, I mean, he's like any kid in a lot of ways, right? Like, he wants to be, he wants to grow up too fast. He wants to be something bigger than what he is right now, right? Like, I think the really interesting thing about, like, the shadows he lives under, right, is, like, on one hand, he has this, like, he idolizes Holland, right? Holland, the leader of Gecko State, is this legendary legendary surfer, right? / mecha pilot / freedom fighter / whatever the fuck his deal
Space
is.
pirates, yeah.
But also like as they kind of,
Iconoclast, I think it's fair to say. Yeah.
you know, he has a poster of the man in his room.
Yes.
But also like he is the son of someone who is at least so far implied to be like the savior of the world.
It says it on his gravestone, savior of the world.
Right. Like we don't know the details yet, but
Yeah.
Renton's father did something that like fundamentally changed the planet. And
But even that is portrayed in a very nuanced way, right?
Like,
Because
how
his
does he
father
live-
is not idolized by this society. He has
No.
been almost kind of forgotten. Like he's still thought about in schools, but people don't seem to properly understand the gravity of what he did. And Renton's relationship with him reflects that. Right?
And I should point out that the show makes this apparent through dialogue eventually, but Renton never knew his father. He was born as his father died, basically.
But they sort of make that obvious in I think episode 2 it is, with like a flashback where they visit his grave, and Renton is clearly very young.
Yeah.
His sister is way older, and they sort of talk about his father in a way that makes it clear that Renton never knew.
I think one thing which the show does that's very smart, and that like I don't see so many modern shows doing, is that Renton keeps repeating that he's 14 years old and nothing has happened in his 14 years of life.
Renton Thurston, 14 years old.
Yes, but the show very consciously and deliberately codes him as a child, you know, almost as younger than his age. You know, he has a squeaky voice, he has very juvenile fantasies and hobbies, you know, and I think that sort of gives the character room to grow and also casts this sort of childish wanderlust in the appropriate light, you know, which it is a child's dream of, you know, freedom of, you know, when you're a small child, you dream that being a grown up is you get to do whatever you want and go wherever you want and just do whatever, whenever the will takes you, you know. And
it's basically the thing is like that he is a very good example of what male puberty is like, because, and I say male puberty because it is a bit different for girls, as in when you're like a young boy at that age, you are still very much a child. Like many 14-year-old boys do still have very childish interests, very childish ways of looking at the world, where on the other hand, your body is becoming that of an adult, you know, and that contrast, that conflict is often at the very core of these kinds of stories. And to take it back to Fully Cooley, which we mentioned before, right?
Fully Cooley, again, a very good example of that, you know. And I think it's fair to say that, like, Renton thinks about being an adult in the way that a child would think about being an adult, right? Like, you know, and obviously, you know, no spoilers or anything, but part of the story of the show is his journey to actually becoming an adult.
And like Holland is also clearly framed in the story as this ideal that Renton makes him out to be. Like even when we see him without Renton being anywhere near, the show still very selectively portrays him as that, you know, cool dude who does whatever he wants, he was always right and always has the best intentions. And it's only in episode 2 that you start to see that Holland is also a human being, you know.
Yeah, you know, and I think, you know, the show keeps him at a distance in these first couple of episodes because it's intended to enhance his mystery and enhance the stuff surrounding his relationships to the characters. But yes, I mean, like, he is set up as an idol, as the epitome of, you know, the freedom, the masculinity, the sort of devil may care spirit that Renton is aspiring to be, you know. And obviously, as time goes by, I think we'll find out that things were a little bit different than that ideal, you know. But that's all part of that story, you know. One little thing I just wanted to point out here is that Renton's weird compact drive powered motorbike is adorable and also shows up
yeah.
a bunch in key art because whoever
Yes.
designed it clearly, like, there's a very Akira Toriyama, I drew this cool bike, let's shoehorn it into as
Yeah.
many like bits of art as possible.
Look,
I mean, it
it's
might
a
have
really
just been
neat
designed by
bike.
Kawamori himself.
Almost certainly, yes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it's just,
probably.
I just wanted to point out that, like, it's because guess what? We never see it again, but it's a really
Yeah.
neat little bit of kit there.
But yes, I guess to link to all this stuff in the intro, yeah, like, I guess the other thing we could bring up, we could get to it now, right, is that Eureka 7, being a show that, like, in which music is quite important, and the culture of music is very important, employs a number of insert songs, right? And we kind of hear the first one at the beginning of, like, Renton's introduction montage, right? This is it is Storywriter by Supercar.
Yep.
And I feel like this song is also part of the, like, why, again, not exactly the same genre, but I feel like this intro is so, like, fully coolly coded in a lot of ways. Right?
I mean, it is very much in that, like, early 2000s alt rock.
Yeah.
vibe,
Garage rocky,
like that main riff is very similar to the works of the Pillows, perhaps a little bit spacier, a bit shoegazier. Like Supercar are one of the like main, more like experimental alternative bands. If the Pillows are like, your indie rock band from that era, Supercar, along with something like Number Girl, are the more like a bit like edgier, a bit more underground. And they also owe a lot of their fame to their song being used in this. What I didn't actually know is that when Supercar split up, some key members started a new band called Llama, along with one. What's his name? Kensuke Ushio.
Oh!
Yes, who nowadays is best known as the composer for things like Chainsaw Man. The Hake Story, stuff like that. So
Mr. Devilman Crybaby.
Yeah, small world.
You see this a lot in, small, tightly knit music scenes, is that everyone knows everyone, and the industry is insanely incestuous and stuff like that, But yeah, I mean, the music is such an important element of Eureka 7, not just in its aesthetics, but also in what it represents and everything like that, So there will be lots of discussion of the music, I'm sure. Let's talk a little bit about the title character, who does indeed show up in this very first episode.
In the ultimate boyhood dream, everything will start to make sense once a cute girl crashes into my life.
She literally falls from the sky in the most cliched way possible. Also, I just want to say, quote, "She's the ideal girl who doesn't think what I say is strange," is a line for all time. Frame it and put it on the wall.
Yeah.
Like,
is that not what we all strive for at the end of the day?
I was honestly surprised by Eureka.
How so?
Yeah.
All of the key art I see, and I think, Rei Ayanami clone.
Yes.
But she isn't that. She has a lot more agency than I would expect. And once again, this comes back to my central thesis of this show has aged incredibly well and was ahead of its time, because we have a female character, a female protagonist who has agency, who isn't a walking stereotype, who doesn't exist merely to get upstaged by the main, by the male character who needs to be rescued. This is all very like girl power pop feminism, a strong woman who don't need no man discourse, which may be tired in its own right, but it is incredibly refreshing to see in this kind of show, because as you mentioned, she is the classic magical girlfriend who falls from the sky. But once again, they do fun, interesting things with it. Like, she has more knowledge than he does. He kind of falls in love with her at first sight, as opposed to the other way around.
He's extremely whipped, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And I mean, she just overall comes across as more competent and complex than merely a plot device who is there to quite literally deliver the plot to our main character, right? She is not a vessel. She has more to do and say, more importantly.
Yeah, I think, G and I spoke a little bit earlier about this, like, Eureka 7 being one of the wave of the second wave post-Ava shows. And I think Eureka is an interesting example of that, in that she very clearly is Ray Ionari.
Right.
You know,
I
she
mean,
is
she
based
is-
on the same.
She is at
archetype.
least the core of the whole.
Right. I mean, she again, shout outs to Kenichi Yoshida's like character work, right? Like they very like make it very apparent, right? Like they purposely give her this like kind of unnerving 1,000-yard stare, right?
Yes.
Like
She displays it quite well in the opening.
yes.
And you know, I think the thing is, I think she will her level of agency and competence is variable in the way that an actual human beings would be competent.
Yes.
You know, something like, I will point out that Renton does save her in this pair of episodes,
because that's what I was kind of alluding to when I said the whole pop feminism strong character is not as dated, as in I don't mind, you know, when a female character is rescued by a male character, you know, that in se is not a bad thing. It only becomes a bad thing when it sort of bleeds out into saying something about society and gender politics and how people should always interact with each other in all cases. Whereas this seems very more clearly like, oh, these are just human beings, and sometimes they make mistakes and they need to get saved or they need to eat crow, and other times they're the ones who are in the right. And I think these 2 episodes already make that very clear, that this is an equivalent or a relationship where both sides are very much equivalent. You know, sometimes Eureka knows things that Renton doesn't know. Sometimes Renton knows things that Eureka doesn't know.
I mean, she's a much more nuanced take on the Ray Ayanami stereotype, which is clearly she is emotionally and worldly naive. You know, she clearly does not function in the same way.
Right. You know, she even has the whole like I can commune with the machine kind of, you know, angle, right? You know, she can hear the voice.
But it is not infantilizing the way that character type often is nowadays.
No, that's the thing. She does have, you know, she doesn't. Her ignorance is not portrayed as an absolute, that like, because one of the major problems with this character archetype is a lot of the time that even when something is explained to them, they don't retain that knowledge. But Eureka is clearly interested in Renton from, you know, like a purely anthropological standpoint.
Right.
You know, she shows curiosity. She should, and like the fact that he makes her laugh is something which the characters comment on themselves. You know.
Yeah. In fact, speaking of, I was going to say the kind of interesting thing I picked up on that I definitely did not at the time. Right, is like so. Yeah, you know, to summarize, right, Eureka literally crashes in with the Nervosh Type 0, which, quick aside, Nervosh Type 0 may be one of my favorite Shoji Kawamori.
It's an incredible design
of all times. It's so fucking good. But she crashes in with the Nervosh, says that basically, oh, I need help, like, it's malfunctioning, I need the help of Renton's grandpa, you know, there's some implications where Renton's grandfather recognizes the Nervosh Type 0. And then you get the reveal that, like, Eureka's crashing in with the Nervosh so that Holland doesn't have to.
Yes.
And I think this is
a
really fascinating bit of character building already that I definitely did not pick up at the time, that like Holland, again, despite being built up as like the cool guy, right? Like the coolest dude who ever lived in the world of Eureka 7, wants to avoid an awkward confrontation with Renton's grandpa, and so puts a child up to doing it for him.
I mean,
basically,
it's also interesting from the other side, because like the first meeting between Renton and Eureka isn't a fated encounter. Like she is just like, oh, I'm bringing my car into your dad's garage.
I destroyed your room and then set the remains on fire.
And I don't want to be here because my shitty brother, it's actually my shitty brother's car, but he doesn't want to because he still owes your granddad like
right, he has like
$30. Like,
basically, I just think it speaks volumes to these characters in these little ways that like I think will compound really interestingly as you kind of reveal more about all of them.
And you know, we're sort of bleeding into episode 2 now, but when Holland actually does show up take the fall, so to speak. It's not because he's frightened or because he wants to avoid trouble. It's because he's ashamed. He's ashamed.
Confronting Renton's grandfather sort of puts a dent in his carefully curated image of the fearless rebel / sky pirates.
I mean, it's very clear that he had something to do with Renton's father, Axel's son's death, and
also Renton's sister, right?
Yes, and clearly there is deep history with the family there, and I want to give a shout out to the writing of Axel, Renton's grandfather here, because yes, he is kind of a comedy, grumpy old man, but they give him enough pathos, they give him enough genuine emotion to make the character more than just a caricature. When it's funny for him to be a caricature, he is a caricature. Like the scene where he and Renton, can have an argument over what he's going to do in his future, and he tries to throw the ball away. But there's a sense of the fear of loss that he projects.
Absolutely.
As well.
It's I think this is a really wonderful thing that Eureka 7 does time and time again, is put people of different ages in the same situation and kind of examine how they've internalized or realized these situations, because basically Renton's grandfather is in same way, I mean, he has basically experienced the same loss as Renton. Right? He has basically witnessed the decimation of his entire family.
Yeah.
Right?
Renton is all he has left.
Right. Renton's mother has already passed by this point. Renton's dad also, who knows what happened to him? He saved the world. That's all we know.
He's no longer in the picture. Well, we can also say he is presumed dead because he has a grave.
Renton's sister has also disappeared, never to be seen again. Right?
I do think it's a little goofy. They give her the invisible face treatment.
I know.
Because spoiler alert, we eventually see her face and she's fine. It's just she's just a completely normal person.
She's just a person, right? It's you're always what are they hiding from us, right?
It's visual storytelling, right? They're trying to say that she has disappeared from their life.
It represents just a distance between.
Right? Yeah, it's just a little goofy as well.
But to bring it back, right? It's everything, and the thing is, I don't think Renton's not cognizant of this, but he's so much younger. He doesn't have the emotional maturity to recognize how deeply painful this type of situation can be, because he's a kid, right? This is all he's ever known, right?
Children think they're immortal.
That's also the thing. All his grandpa is all he's ever known. He barely knew his sister. He didn't know his father. Probably didn't know his mother. So he's coming at this from a completely different perspective. To him, family is that boring thing tying you down.
Yeah, the thing which holds you down.
Yeah, right? Whereas to grandpa, it's the only thing I have left, or the only thing to hold on to. Right?
But yeah, anyways, I guess it wouldn't really be a mecha anime if we didn't gin up a reason for the baddies to show up at the end of the first episode and to push Renton into the call to adventure, right?
Yes. Let's move on to episode 2 here. I think, to me, one of the acid tests of whether people are going to like this show is whether you like Renton shouting "I can fly" in broken English, or whether you think it's dumb as hell. And the truth is, it's kind of a bit of both.
But
it's a great moment, I think.
It works, right? Because it is very much. I mean, to echo Aqua's circling call to hero's journey 3 times in a red marker.
Yeah.
It is the most call to adventure it's ever been, right? Basically,
he literally jumps off a cliff.
Yes, Renton has to deliver a MacGuffin to the Nervosh, a Temray circuit, and to be clear, they have echoed time and time again that Renton cannot surf, right? Or he is bad.
Can't surf well. Yeah.
And so when he finally jumps off the cliff and makes the sick jump, it's that's the visual and narrative and thematic communication that accepted the call.
The artistic part of the presentation is so important, right? You get the swarm of skyfish surrounding him. I should mention that the title of this episode is Blue Skyfish. And because Aqua, I'm not going to force you to try and guess this one.
I was just going to say I'm drawing a blank here.
Yeah, no. The title comes from the song "Skyfish" by Color Variation, which is an obscure Japanese electro band.
Of course.
So you're going to find way more of those than like big name presentation. Big name bands there, But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think, I'm a real sucker for anything which involves like small human people around mechs in the same sort of scenario. So like having Renton surf on his like man single person board while the giant robots
next
are
to the LFOs.
Yeah.
He pulls off the legendary move.
Yeah.
The legendary cut back drop turn.
Yes.
Put the cut back drop turn in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater.
Yeah.
Yes. I think one little touch I really like is where he just gets blown away by the engine wash. I think that's really good. Like it adds some real physicality to it. I was just going to say Eureka catches him in the nerve ash, breaking every bone in her legs in the meantime.
Now he gets to fall from the sky into her lap.
Indeed. So you were going to say, Aqua?
I think there's two main things that stand out in this episode. First one being, like, I think the signature scene for this episode is the conversation between Holland and Renton's grandpa that we've already talked about. I think the other very striking thing that they do is the hard cut from Renton activating the Amida drive, to giant crater.
I will point out that this is almost a direct lift of Evangelion episode 2, which is we see the beginning of the fight. We get a cut to the aftermath, and then it's filled in later in flashback.
I was going to do the Boss Baby tweet thing and be like, "Oh, this is like in Fire Punch."
Well, I will say, that, like, actually to speak to this, like, we've been talking about the Evangelion, like, influence on Eureka 7. Like, I would actually, I mean, I think it definitely has that. I think the more I think about Eureka 7, and this is speaking to later events, so, like, maybe I'll save this thesis for the next time I'm on, but, like, Eureka 7 is also kind of just the original Gundam in a lot of ways. Right?
I mean, the original Gundam is a very reliable... I mean, it's not like Mobile Suit Gundam was the first story to use that particular framework.
No, but I mean specifically, like, again, I don't want to, like, spoil anything, but, like, it's like... Renton's relationship with things that happen between Renton and Holland, reminiscent of Bright and Amuro, right? A choice Renton makes concerning Gekko State.
Yeah, I mean,
very closely mirrors something Amuro does on the.
One
white
could
base,
almost say that Gundam / Evangelion / Eureka 7 is some kind of mecha monomyth that is remade every generation.
And that's actually maybe what I'm actually trying to get at is like in some ways, because here's the thing, right? I watched Eureka 7 like long before I like became fully immersed in Gundam.
Likewise.
And I think in hindsight, it's like, oh, like I think Eureka 7 actually maybe did succeed at I don't know if this is apocryphal, but I've heard some places that like part of like the motivation behind Eureka 7 was like an attempt to make a modern Gundam, right, for modern audiences.
Sure, and like just a reminder, as we established at the beginning of the episode, a lot of the people who worked on this show had worked on actual Gundam shows.
Exactly,
before.
And
so what you're saying is that this is a mecha show that, unlike other mecha shows, it's about the characters?
No, this one's about the robots.
No, this one's just about how fucking sick Nervosh is.
The thing I kind of like to get back to the point, though, the thing I was saying is not specifically like what I'm talking about here when it echoes Evangelion is specifically the dramatic structure of the episode. It's not a theme or a style or anything. It is specifically
and also some aesthetics, like. I was sort of shocked when Nervosh like awakens and just tears those dudes in half.
That was the other thing I was gonna is like that flashback is very Ava.
Yeah.
And we are reaching in 2005 we are reaching the end of the age in which every mecha anime was basically just Evangelion, but it continues to cast a long shadow over the genre, and certainly the people who worked on this show were big fans of Evangelion. I'm sure that I'm sure almost everybody who worked on this show was or had at least seen it.
Right.
But I think it's I think they use that dramatic presentation to make the structure of the episode interesting, and I think they do a good job of keeping up the energy, even though the real meat of this episode is mostly in talking scenes.
Right. I mean, the thing is, like, it's also just cheating, because structurally the money shot needs to come in like the first 5 minutes of the episode, but that's not how it works. You put your money shot at the very end.
Yes, yeah.
So,
but is it cheating, or is that just how you make cinema?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
That's how you make things interesting, right? Yeah. By giving audience once again by giving audiences what they want and expect, but doing it in a creative way.
Yeah, that's just good filmmaking, and I think the conversations in this scene. I mean, I think you're right, Aqua, when you say that the core scene in this episode is the Holland Axel confrontation / conversation. I think that there's I think again that Grandpa Thurston is done really well here. I think that he, there's that visible conflict between his desire to protect Renton, but also his pride in what he's doing and what he's achieving.
Which is sort of brought to the forefront in this idea of the Yamata drive, right? Because he wants to protect Renton, but on the other hand, he also does not hesitate in immediately handing him the thing and saying, go and take it to her because she needs this, right?
And Holland calls him out on that, right? He says, like, you threw the boy into a war zone, and Grandpa Thurston is kind of sideswiped. He doesn't really have a good justification for it, and I think. I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say that Renton will indeed be leaving with the Gecko State, but you see the difficulty with that he struggles with and that his grandfather struggles with.
It makes a character, because the thing, like, a mistake many people make is assuming that humans are always consistent. Your character needs to have a personality, so ergo they must always act like that in every situation, whereas that's not how human beings work, right? Human beings are full of contradictions, and you see that here with Grandpa, as in, he is supposedly, the comically stodgy curmudgeon who is always like who keeps Renton down and who dismisses his dreams and says, it's always just living a simple life out here in the sticks. That's what life is all about.
I think the speech in the flashback in front of the grave, where he's like, "All those who follow their dreams are fools," who end up a little bit on the nose,
perhaps. Right. But like then they point out, or then he does something that actually contradicts all of that, and when Holland confronts him with that, he just doesn't know what to say. He's like, "Yeah, I mean." And that's the contradiction, right? Yeah. I want to protect my son, my grandson, but on the other hand, I also know that I have the responsibility to take care of this MacGuffin. And when time comes for the MacGuffin to do what it needs to do, I'm not going to hesitate, and I'm not going to be so stubborn in sticking to my characterization and the role I am supposed to play in this narrative. If we go meta for a bit.
I mean, part of it is also a recognition that, like, whether he wants it or not, the wider world is opening up to Renton. I think most parents have that experience of realizing there comes a point where you cannot shield your children forever, right? You cannot protect them. You cannot deny the wider world to them indefinitely, and I think this is a fairly nuanced portrayal of somebody coming to terms with that, obviously, in extremely heightened circumstances, but the basic emotion there is familiar and relatable.
I mean, and that's also like, that's just what storytelling is, right? Familiar scenarios in extremely heightened circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or at least things that relate to life, and it's really wonderful that this show does not just focus on the experience of the target audience, but also, asks for humanity when it comes to portraying characters that may perhaps to the target audience seem like obstacles, right?
Yeah, I mean it's a more nuanced portrayal of the adult figure than one would expect from a show that is explicitly aimed at teenage boys, right?
And also a show that is explicitly about following your dreams and defying expectations.
Yeah, and
wish fulfillment in that regard.
Without spoiling anything, I think it's fair to say that the idea of where does the line between your responsibilities and your wishes lie is a theme that the show will come back around to a few times, but I just wanted to before we wrap up on episode 2, I just wanted to get your take, particularly Aqua, on our ostensible villains so far, our mysterious clad in the black of evildoers military force there. We don't get much of them, but
these guys are kind of like a representation of how the show does world building, in that it is a show that does world building in what is in my opinion the right way, as in it needles you with terminology, with concepts that it will not explicitly explain for now, but it is still clear for the audience to understand what is narratively important and what is flavor, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the villains here showing up sort of mirror that, in that you don't really get told what their deal is. Like, they are obviously an authoritarian force. We just know that through pop cultural osmosis. But it's not necessary. Like, we don't know enough about the world yet to know what they represent. Are they the state? Are they a state? Are they an organization? Are they a corporation? That's not clear. So the show, like, wisely uses very, very classic tropes, the military uniforms, the very strict hierarchy, the sort of naive auditor character who's like, oh, you can't do this, you're
Right.
you're stepping over the line, whereas the general dude is like, you have nothing to say here, shut up, you're new here. So it once again evokes very familiar tropes to indicate what these guys' role in the story is, while still holding back on over-explaining what they're actually here to do. So the mystery still remains.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that obviously, we get so little of them here that it's a very broad picture, but you're absolutely right. I think that the show is confident enough to fall back on just, giving the audience the bare minimum of signifiers, the black clothing, the military parlance, to let you know, oh, this is the man,
I do find it funny that these guys look like they're from a completely different show.
Kind of.
They look way more 70s than everything else. I mean, they look like Gundam characters. They look like
Zigg. They're not quite as Nazi coded as Zigg.
No, but I know exactly what Aqua is talking about. Like the character design choices for the military here. It's very. Look, these dudes should be like the guy with the handlebar mustache. We'll find out his name later. He should be hanging out with Bosk Ohm or something.
That's like the thing.
No, he's not on that level. He's a Jamaican guy.
Sure,
because they're based on the same thing. What does an evil empire look like in Japanese media? It looks like not even the Third Reich. It looks like the Kaiser Reich. It looks like World War I era Germany.
I mean, more specifically to this show, I think it is that they represent, the classic form of governmental militaristic control, right? Order as opposed to the Gecko State's chaos. A very uniform, buttoned up look, as opposed to kind of like the hang loose philosophy,
strict adherence to hierarchy.
All that,
zero tolerance for defiance or wrong think, and
in classic fashion as well, the first thing we see of them is they're arguing with each other, which, might become a bit of a running theme, let's say. So I from what I'm hearing, I'm guessing you enjoyed these first 2 episodes very much, Aqua.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a very refreshing thing to see. It's like, to once again come back to my thesis, it was sort of disarming to see a show that is 20 years old and sort of shows how much storytelling in this kind of anime has regressed to playing the hits without understanding why the hits are hits.
Sure. Well, we'll see, because, the show will begin to snake and twist and turn a little bit from here on, so we'll see how you feel about some of the developments that are coming up. G, did you have any final thoughts on episodes 1 and 2 here?
Nothing too much. I think, again, just having the benefit of like foresight, right? There are so many, like, believe me, there's the version of G's Eureka 7 thesis that can go on for like another 2 hours, but I think
maybe one day we'll have time for it.
But I think just in terms of like the first 2 episodes, this will, I don't think this will date this podcast, but like, in our most recent normal podcast, the GLORIO Chat, I kind of talked about what I think is actually like the most important thing you have to do in like your first and second episode. And the thing I say in that podcast is like, I don't necessarily need the most like consistent, coherent world building or exposition or even dialogue necessarily, right? Like what I need is like the sell of a promise, right? A vibe, a feeling. And
there's a lot about the world of Eureka 7 that we don't even know yet. Like, what the hell was up with that giant broccoli that showed up out of nowhere?
Oh yeah, or as you guys just talked about, like, what even is the military in this setting, right? Like, what do they even represent other than generic baddies?
But you need to hook someone in the first couple of episodes,
and I think like watching these first 2 episodes reminded me, like, oh man, yeah, like Eureka 7's like first couple episodes are like so good at grabbing you. Like,
it is a great advertisement to spend more time in this world.
Definitely. Like, we talk about like what makes for a good episode, obviously in our seasonal coverage, right? Like we tend to place a quite a heavy weight on a good first impression. And yeah, again, I don't know if I'm going to go quite like all the way into the like they don't make them like this anymore territory, but like, yeah, man, Eureka 7, huh? Holy shit!
It's a really strong opening. I think
it really is. Yeah,
these first episodes are fantastic. They do a great job of selling you on the show. And it's only going to get wilder from here. So I just want to say thank you, Aqua. Thank you, G, for joining me on this debut episode.
You're welcome.
G, you're always welcome to swing by whenever you've got the time to join us on an episode in the future there.
Yeah, for sure. I know, like, to peek behind the curtain, right? We talked about me kind of coming on a provisional basis, and I don't know if I'll always have like the time in the world to do this every week, but like I definitely think I'm at the very least locked into a rewatch of Eureka 7.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome to rewatch along whether you're on the show or not, obviously.
So like I think I would definitely love to come back on, especially for some of the big moments, right? Or
definitely.
So definitely
Absolutely.
would like to talk about it. You can hear it in my voice. I got more to say about Eureka 7.
Yeah, you're excited, man. That's good. That's good.
I just picture you, vibrating in your chair like that one Deku bit from My Hero Academia episode 1.
Look, I'm just saying, like, I'm trying to tiptoe here, but there are themes, man. There are characters in this show that
Themes and characters we'll find out together as we go watching along.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you everyone for listening. If you liked the show, if you've got some feedback for us, leave a comment on the blog there. Our plan is to do these fortnightly in the gaps between the GLORIO Chat, our regular podcast. So it'll be the GLORIO Chat one week, then Blue Mondays the next week, and so on and so forth there. Obviously, there might be some schedule shake-up, but our plan is for the next episode, 2 weeks from now, we're going to do episodes 3 and 4. So we'll be doing the show roughly as it was airing in real time there. So just to say again, that's episode 3, Motion Blue, and episode 4, Watermelon. Which we'll be talking about next time.
Oh, combo breaker. So they're not going to all be called something with blue.
No, the blue thing is something which I'm not entirely sure. I think it was just to theme it after Blue Monday, honestly. But you know the drill. You know, read us on the blog, follow us, subscribe to the podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, Stitcher, on YouTube as well. You know, thanks to Joe, who will be doing some editing on this as well. And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.